Well, all this week you've been hearing from various candidates for various elected offices here in Sangamon County, and perhaps none more important than the candidates we're going to be speaking to right now, because one of them will have the ability to assess fines against you, perhaps to put you behind bars for a long period of time, even for the rest of your life, if you're particularly poorly behaved. We know most of you are not, but still, a great deal of power to be invested in one of these two gentlemen running for circuit judge in the 7th Judicial Circuit that includes Sangamon County. We are joined in studio this morning by the incumbent, Republican John Schmidt, and by his opponent, Democrat Tim Londrigan. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Jim.
And as we always point out for our listeners, it is not a debate per se. There's no stopwatch. There's no time limit. We want to have a free and open conversation. We do ask the candidates to keep their answers relatively concise, so we have plenty of time for both to be heard on a variety of subjects this morning. And we will start, as we often do, just by simply asking our two candidates this morning to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to this point, why you are seeking this judgeship here in Sangamon County. Let's begin with the incumbent, John Schmidt.
Well, good morning, Jim. Good morning, Tim. It is an absolute honor and a pleasure to serve as your circuit judge. As I've said many times before, if you do not understand or appreciate the privilege that's been bestowed upon you when you take the bench and the citizens rise for the judge, not you personally, the judge, then you need to quit and let someone else do it, because you're not taking the job seriously or you don't understand the importance. I've been a judge for the past 2 years. In those past 2 years, I've handled just about every case imaginable that can come before you, from speeding cases all the way up to first-degree murder cases, from civil cases to chancery cases to probate cases. So I've handled just about everything that's come before us. Prior to serving as your circuit judge, I was the Sangamon County State's Attorney elected for 3 terms. For 11 years, I served in that capacity. And in that capacity, I developed a wealth of knowledge. The state's attorney is noted. It gets a lot of notoriety for what they do in the criminal courtroom and keeping you safe, and I certainly have a good resume of doing that. But also, as a state's attorney, I dealt with land use issues, contract issues, employment issues, I said contract already, all the issues that come before the operation of a county, which is like a small corporation. I'm doing this because, as I said, it is an honor to serve, to be a public servant, and that's what a judge is. Judge works for you. You don't work for the judge.
Tim Londrigan, tell us about yourself and why you would want to be a judge in the 7th Circuit.
Well, Jim, I've been practicing law here in Central Illinois for about 30 years now, and during that period of time, I have been in court on every conceivable type of case that a judge could really encounter. I've been a prosecutor for 30 years with the State's Attorney's Appellate Prosecutor's Office. In addition to that, I've been the city hearing officer, which is a quasi-judicial position, for 7 years, similar to being a judge in that I hear the ordinance and violations that the city imposes against individuals. I've also been a practicing attorney, and I've been, fortunate to be able to represent a great many individuals here in Sangamon County in a wide variety of civil matters. I've been involved in very complex litigation, class actions, products liability claims, and I've been arguing throughout the state in just about every appellate court. I've argued over 100 times in the appellate and Supreme Court. I've written over 400 briefs, and I've decided to be I'm trying to be, rather, a circuit judge, because I feel as though that's the best way that I can give back to the community that's been so good to me. My family's been here for a pretty long period of time. My father was a judge. My family has a lot of lawyers and judges in the history of the family, and it's something that's kind of expected of those to try to do their best to give back.
One of the challenges that I am facing this morning in preparing for this interview is the fact that judicial ethics prevent you really from talking about how you might rule in particular cases. You cannot prejudge the issues that may come before you, which leaves us with the question that I think a lot of voters are facing in this election as they go to the polls. How are they supposed to evaluate you? How are they supposed to determine whether or not you would be the kind of judge they would want you to be? And since you have experience in this issue, John Schmidt, I want to begin with you to address that question as to what criteria really should voters be using in determining who would be the best choice to serve them on the bench.
I think there are many criteria. I mean, there are a lot of barometers you can use, but first and foremost, your performance. They can see what I've done on the bench. They can see I've made the difficult decisions. They can see I follow the law every time. Without a doubt, I follow the law. So that's first and foremost. Second, they get to know you as an individual. Many people know us, and that's also an important factor. But how you're going to perform on the bench is best determined by what you've done on the bench. For the past 2 years, I have served the people of the 6 counties of the 7th Circuit. I've served them well, but I followed the law. I have a track record, and my track record are my written opinions. Go look at them. They're public documents. That's how you can tell.
Tim Londrigan, how are voters supposed to assess you to determine that you might be a better option than the incumbent John Schmidt?
Well, I think the voters need to look at the experience of both candidates and the background. I think that's what really, and of course your personal knowledge, if you're fortunate enough to have personal knowledge of the candidate, and I think that's the biggest hurdle. Most people don't know John or I, and so that makes it difficult. We try to get around and meet as many people as we can. But I think it's important to look at, an individual's background. I've never run for office before. I'm not a political animal. I haven't been, I don't owe anybody any political favors or obligations. I have been a lawyer for 30 years, and during that time, I think I have amassed, in all honesty, a pretty strong resume for civil experience. And when I talk about that, I want to mention that of the 6 circuit judges we have right now, 5 of them are products of the state's attorney's office, and that's not a bad background. But I think a judge needs a wide variety of experience, and the bench as a whole needs to be diverse. So I think that I bring something unique to the bench. I bring an understanding of how civil litigants participate in trials, and that's the distinction that I would draw is that I think John's background basically is in criminal law. And although the state's attorney may do some quasi-type civil litigation, the civil background that I'm discussing that I enjoy is courtroom experience, the types of things that judges really don't learn by doing. I mean, you learn by actually getting in there and practicing the law, by trying to be the proponent of your client's case. It's kind of like a referee in a boxing match. I mean, you can ref a few rounds, but you don't understand what the boxers are trying to do unless you've really been a boxer. I don't think anybody would suggest that the referees that were brought in to replace the old referees for the NFL situation didn't know what they were doing, but nevertheless, I think the real refs understood, had the experience necessary to understand and do a better job.
You said you're not a political animal, and yet you're both required to do the things that politicians have to do in this campaign. You're running for office. You go out, you're meeting voters, you're shaking hands, you're raising money, you're accepting donations from various groups. And I want to ask you about that, about some of the sources of your money. There's, in fact, an article in the newspaper today about some of where this money is coming from. And to ask you, does it, in fact, serve the cause of justice when you have to turn to, Mr. Londrigan, in your case, you've received some donations from lawyers and law offices here in town, various interest groups and political groups for Judge John Schmidt. Does it serve the cause of justice to have to go to those groups for money when you are running to be an impartial arbiter of the law sitting on the bench? And how do you balance that, the money that you're getting and the at least perceived debt you may owe some people versus your requirement to administer the law impartially? Let's start with Tim Londrigan.
Well, I think that is a problem, Jim. And the Supreme Court, though, has attempted to address that problem by prohibiting judicial candidates from accepting money personally or from really I guess it is a matter of public knowledge. You can get on the election site and see who has contributed toward you, but you're asked not to do that. So you're asked to distance yourself from the aspect of raising money, and you're asked to form a committee for that purpose. So that's the Supreme Court's effort at trying to address that. But, nevertheless, I suppose it is still a perception problem, and it's something that we could look at. The question is, what's the alternative? Are you going to suggest that judges be appointed as opposed to be elected? Or are you going to have the elections publicly funded? So these are all alternatives that could be discussed, but I don't know if in the end they're going to remove politics from it. In the end, I think politics is part of everyday life, particularly here in Sangamon County.
Judge John Schmidt, we talk a lot about the role of money and the influence that it may have over elected officials. Can you divorce yourself from that as a judge, knowing that you have had to rely on contributions from various people and various groups as part of your effort to win a full term in this seat?
Absolutely. First of all, you follow the law. There's the Supreme Court rules that say that you form a committee, an independent committee that does the fundraising for you. You follow the rules that say that should you believe a conflict, that you can't be fair and impartial, you recuse yourself right away. By following the rules, you certainly avoid that appearance of impropriety or that appearance of conflict. You also have to keep in mind, the law, the Citizens United case out of the Supreme Court. That is the law of the land that says that political contributions are a form of speech and are protected. So I think our laws that the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court rules that have been given to us, certainly address this to provide that money is raised for the candidates and that there's no appearance of impropriety. Again, if there is, you simply recuse yourself.
Tim Londrigan started to address this a little bit. Let me ask this to you as well, because you were, in fact, appointed to this judgeship. Now you are running for election to a full term as circuit judge. Does it make sense to elect judges? Since you were appointed and you feel like you've done a good job in it, would appointment of judges be a better alternative than election?
No, I think the citizens should always choose the judiciary, and we do in Illinois, and I think that's a good system.
And Tim Londrigan, I mean, you said this is something we could consider. Do you have a preference one way or the other as to whether we should continue to elect judges or go to an appointment system?
Well, my preference is the election as well. I don't think you're going to remove politics from the equation by making it an appointed position, because it comes down to who makes the appointment. And in the end, you're probably going to have another politician making the appointment, and I don't think that removes the political influence from the situation.
We have many more questions for our candidates for circuit judge in the 7th Judicial Circuit, the incumbent John Schmidt, the challenger Tim Londrigan. The candidates for Sangamon County, for 7th Judicial Circuit judge. The 7th Circuit includes Sangamon County and 5 other counties. Incumbent John Schmidt and challenger Tim Londrigan are in studio with us. I want to return to something we were talking about earlier, which is how do voters evaluate you and evaluate your skills, your performance, your ability to serve them on the bench. One way that it seems to me would make it easier for that evaluation would be if there were, in fact, cameras in our courtrooms, microphones, the ability for the media to show what's happening in those courtrooms. John Schmidt, earlier you talked about people can go back and read your opinions, and they certainly can do that, but having the ability to see you in action and see demeanor on the bench would also be beneficial. This is something that hasn't happened yet, but would you be in favor of cameras in the courts in the 7th Circuit? Let's start with you, John Schmidt.
Absolutely. I've been on record before. The Supreme Court recently passed rules providing for cameras in the courtroom. I couldn't be happier. They addressed every single concern people had with cameras in the courtroom, and they've addressed it, and they've got the issues resolved. Courtrooms are public, and it's fine to say it's a public venue. You can come watch, but in the real life world, you can't take off work to come down to watch court proceedings. I mean, people have jobs and they need their jobs to support their family. Cameras in the courtroom would allow the people to see what we do day in and day out. They provide transparency. They're a rebuttal to the argument that, oh, you're just in that courtroom doing X, Y, and Z. You can see what we do. Absolutely, we should do it. And the rules are so well thought out. I say this about that. If you recall, years ago, the William Kennedy Smith sexual assault trial, if you recall, the victim had to testify in that case with a blue dot. The horror of the sexual assault, and then have to relive that like that with that blue dot is inhumane. These rules address those issues. The judge ultimately has control of what can and cannot be filmed. The jury can't be filmed. The victim, if necessary, won't be filmed when they testify at trial. They have where the cameras will be. It's a one-camera, single-feed system. They have to share. The media has to share. All these issues have been addressed. I'm very excited about it. As you can tell, I certainly advocate that our chief judge apply to the Supreme Court, because you have to apply to the Supreme Court for the program, and we do it. I'll be the first one to sign up for it. I'll gladly shepherd it in. I'll do the work. But yes, absolutely a good idea.
Any sense as to when you think we'll see it then in the 7th Circuit?
You know what? The sooner, the better.
Tim Londrigan, your thoughts on cameras and microphones in courtrooms?
I think they're great. I mean, as John just expressed, I think my concerns would be just that the victim's rights are protected, the jury's animosity or anonymity rather is protected as well, and that those who work in the courtroom, that all those interests are understood and protected. But yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think people ought to be able to see what's going on.
Ultimately, the role of the judge is to ensure that justice is dispensed fairly and impartially. Tim Londrigan, I've seen in other interviews where you have raised concerns that perhaps there is a double standard of justice, that some people get a different standard of justice than others do in our court system, that perhaps if you are wealthy, if you are influential, if you are connected in some way, the courts may treat you differently than if you do not have those advantages in life. Am I accurately, first of all, depicting your thoughts on this, and in fact, is it a problem here in the 7th Circuit, and what can be done to address it?
Well, I think there is a perception, and I think it's not just Sangamon County, but I think it's probably nationwide that the side that has more influence, more money, or perhaps more power has an advantage in our court system. They can afford, the top-notch attorneys or the top-notch legal team, and I think it's very important for the judiciary to be above that, to be without question impartial, and not have any interest or bias in favor of either party. And it really comes back down to what we were mentioning before, which is just experience. What is the life experiences that you take to the bench? I have been a businessman. I've never held public office. I've been a prosecutor 30 years, but that's not all that I've done. I have worked both sides. I have defended as well as prosecuted. I have sat as a judge for 7 years. And I've been involved in all types of civil litigation, not the types of things that one does in your office or boardroom, but the kind of thing that brings you into the courtroom on a regular basis. And I think that's the kind of thing that people want to see out of a judge, is someone that understands not only what the law is, but how that law is applied and manipulated by some to their advantage.
I want to make sure I clearly understand you. You said it is a perception out there, but in your view, is it in fact a reality? Is justice sometimes dispensed unevenly in the 7th Circuit?
Well, I certainly don't have examples of that. I'm not going to indict any of the current judges. I find all of our judges to be honorable men. But I think the perception is certainly there that, if you're appointed to positions, if you've been given hundreds of thousands of dollars by political organizations over time, that there's a perception that that there's payback or that there's some interest there. And I think that's what we have to be concerned about.
Judge John Schmidt, does that perception exist, and how do we serve to correct that if indeed it is a misperception?
Well, if it does exist, it is a misperception. Look at the work we do. Simply put, people are treated equally and fairly in the 7th Circuit. I thank my opponent for saying I'm an honorable man. I am. And we treat people fairly. We follow the law. We make our decisions based upon the law. That's what I've been doing for the past 2 years, and that's what I will continue to do. I will follow the law.
Let's talk then about sentencing, because I think for a lot of people, when they think about judges, even though you handle a wide variety of cases, civil and criminal alike, a lot of people are thinking mostly about the judge's role in keeping us safe and keeping the bad guys off the street. And I hear a lot from listeners to the show, complaints when a defendant is sentenced and they feel like a sentence is inadequate to the crime at hand. Can you talk in some general terms about your philosophy on sentencing and when you decide to throw the book at someone, when you decide that leniency is more warranted? How do you determine that a more minimal sentence versus the maximum sentence is appropriate in a given case? Judge John Schmidt.
Well, you have to have experience. And first of all, sentencing days are no fun. I mean, the very fact that you're there means something bad has happened to someone, and something bad is about to happen to someone. So there's certainly not a joyful day. You follow the law. That's what you do. The law provides factors in aggravation, factors in mitigation that have to be considered before handing down a sentence. Also keep in mind, the law says, this isn't me, this is the law, The law says that for certain crimes, probation is presumed unless it would deprecate the seriousness of the offense or a sentence to prison is necessary to protect the public. So when you follow the law, the factors in aggravation, the factors in mitigation, and then look at the individual. I've said this before, sentencing is not an algebraic equation. You can't just plug X into Y and get Z and have an answer. It's a very individualized process. You look at the pre-sentence investigation. You consider the evidence, as you must, that is presented to you by both sides, by both the state and both the defense, and you listen to that evidence, and you take that into consideration as you apply the law to the factors in aggravation and factors in mitigation and come up with the sentence. I did 3 sentencings yesterday, all centered around drugs, the abuse of drugs, and mental health. And we know, when you impose a sentence, you know that you've got to impose a sentence that will give the individual an opportunity to reform themselves, punish them, and reform themselves, especially when it comes to drug abuse and mental health or alcohol abuse. Because if you don't fix that, you know they're coming right back before you. And it costs more to have them keep coming back before you. So you've got to try to fashion a sentence that gets the offender help, punishes them, gets them help so they can return to be a useful citizen in our society. That's a challenge, Jim. It's a challenge, and you're not always successful at it. Sometimes it's frustrating because you do see them come back before you.
I want to follow up because you talked earlier about the need to just apply the law fairly and impartially. That's how you avoid that perception of unequal standards of justice. But you also talked about the subjectivity that can go into sentencing, that you have to look at an individual. I mean, how do you avoid viewing someone differently and treating someone differently who's there in a 3-piece suit versus somebody who's there in a torn T-shirt and worn out blue jeans?
That's not the subjectivity I'm talking about. I'm talking about looking at their life's work. What have they done? That's what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter what suit you wear. It matters what you've done. Your life, what you've done in your life has meaning. So that's important, and that's just a factor. It's not the factor. You have to look at everything.
Tim Londrigan, your thoughts on sentencing and how it should be applied, and when is it appropriate to apply the maximum versus when is it appropriate to offer more leniency?
Well, I can echo some of John's thoughts. I mean, obviously, you follow the law. You follow the law in every instance that's before you. But the law is not a clear-cut, static animal. I mean, it doesn't tell you what the sentence ought to be. It doesn't tell you how you should apply the law to the particular set of facts that's before you. And I think that's where you have to rely upon the experience of the judge. That's why you want somebody that has, a balanced background, somebody who's been there, done that, understands both sides of the issue, and understands, from a lifetime of participating in various activities, how to gauge, how to, in effect, judge the quality of the person before you. And I agree with John. Sentencing people is a difficult and a not enjoyable time, but it's absolutely necessary. And you have to, of course, look at the factors that the law asks you to look at. But it's a judgment call, as you suggest. I mean, it comes down to how you weigh them. And you have to look at the individual. You have to look at his potential for rehabilitation. John's correct. You certainly don't want to put people in jail who have the ability to be rehabilitated. But those who choose to do harm to others, those who take justice into their own hands and inflict serious physical harm upon another, I think bring themselves squarely before the judge, and they need to be separated from society. If those individuals can't curb their conduct to the point where they can't abstain from injuring and causing harm to others, they need to be taken out of society and put somewhere where they can no longer do that type of harm.
Gentlemen, I'd like to give you one last chance here to just briefly tell voters again why they should choose you for this very important position in Sangamon and surrounding counties. We'll begin with Judge John Schmidt.
Thank you. And again, Jim, thank you for this opportunity. As I said at the beginning of the program, it is a privilege and an honor to serve as a circuit judge. My philosophy is this: a judge works for you. We're a public servant. You do not work for the judge. People that come before me are treated equally, fairly, with dignity, no matter what their lot in life is. You understand as a judge. You have empathy. You have compassion. You understand that most likely the people that are standing there before you, unless they're there to be married or for an adoption, are there for probably not having a good day in their life, and you listen. One of the greatest attributes I have is I listen. You listen intently to both sides to figure out what the issues are and apply the law, and that's what I do. As I said, my experience is as a judge for the past 2 years doing all sorts of cases from civil to criminal, from adoption to probate, so all those things has taught me to listen, to be fair, to be impartial. It truly is a privilege to serve. Thank you.
Tim Londrigan, your final statement to voters in the 7th Circuit.
Well, I bring a background that I think is unique to the bench. I bring the type of variety of experience that I think not only would make me a better judge, but would also help the rest of the judges understand a little bit more about how the law is being applied by the various proponents that are before the bench. And I echo John's sentiment. It is a privilege to serve, certainly. And I want to make sure that everyone that comes in my courtroom is comfortable, is respected, and they know that they're going to get a fair shake. You know, the idea is to understand how the game can be played to someone's advantage and make sure that doesn't happen, to safeguard the public's interest, to make sure that those who are guilty of violent crime are treated appropriately, and that everyone sees the courtroom as a place they can go to find justice in the wrongs that have been done to them. And I bring 30 years experience to this. I've been a city judge for 7 years. I've been a prosecutor for 30 years. I've been engaged in every type of civil litigation that could conceivably come before a judge, and I've been successful at it. And I think that I can really add something to the bench that the entire community would benefit by.
Challenger Tim Londrigan, Judge John Schmidt, thank you both for your time this morning. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks,
Best of luck to you. Election Day, less than 2 weeks away.